Hey, my name's Ethan Walker. I'm 27 years old and I own a small ranch out in eastern Montana, the kind of place where the land stretches flat and endless under a big sky. My dad left it to me when he passed 5 years ago. Nothing fancy, just a couple hundred acres with some cattle, a few sheep, and enough hayfields to keep me busy from dawn till dusk. I live alone in the old wooden house, the one with creaky floors and a porch that overlooks nothing but grass and distant mountains. I'm not married, never have been. Never really dated much either. After Dad died, I threw myself into the work. Fixing fences, tending to the animals, hauling feed. It's honest labor, and it keeps my mind off things. I'm not rich, but I get by. Folks in town know me as the quiet type, the guy who'll lend a hand if you need it. Like when old Mr. Jenkins' truck broke down last winter, and I towed him home without asking for a dime. That's just how Dad raised me. Life here in Harlow is simple, almost too simple. The town's got maybe 1,000 people, a wooden church that's been standing since the 1800s, a general store where everyone buys their groceries, and the local bank run by folks who've known each other forever. Summers are hot and dry, the sun beating down like it owns the place, turning the dirt roads to dust and the air thick with the smell of hay. I spend my days in the heat, sweat soaking through my shirt, but I don't mind. It's better than the emptiness that creeps in at night when the house is too quiet. That particular afternoon, the sun was high and relentless, probably pushing 95 degrees. I'd just finished mending a section of fence along the north pasture, my hands blistered from the wire when I heard a faint knock at the front door. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm and headed over, figuring it was one of the neighbors needing to borrow a tool or buy some eggs. But when I opened the door, there stood Margaret Miller, leaning against the frame like she might collapse any second. She was about 50, thin and frail, with graying hair pulled back in a loose bun and a face etched with lines from years of hard living. She was coughing hard, that deep, rattling cough that comes from lungs worn out by whatever's eating them up inside. I knew her from the weekly market in town. She sold fresh produce and eggs from her little plot, always with a polite nod, but never much talk. "Mrs. Miller," I said, stepping aside. "You all right? Come in, sit down." She waved off the offer but followed me into the kitchen anyway, her breaths coming in short gasps. I poured her a glass of water from the sink and handed it over. She took a sip, then set it down with trembling hands. No small talk, no beating around the bush. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "My daughter needs a husband. She's a good cook." The words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I stood there, frozen, not sure if I'd heard right. "What?" was all I could manage. Margaret didn't flinch. She sat straighter, though another cough racked her body. When it passed, she continued, her voice steady despite the rasp. "Elena. She's 25, works odd jobs, cleaning houses, selling what little we grow. But that's drying up. I don't have long, Ethan. This damn COPD is taking me slow. But it's taking me. And when I'm gone, she'll be alone. No family left. Just her." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, the wooden table scarred from years of use between us. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because of Victor Hale," she said, her eyes narrowing. Victor was the big man in town, owned the grain silos, half the farmland leases, and had his fingers in the local bank. Everyone knew him as the guy who smiled while he squeezed you dry. He's been after her, offered to take care of her for life if she moves in with him, calls it generosity, but it's control. Elena said no, flat out. So now he's making sure no one hires her, no one buys from her. Whispers in ears, pulls strings. He's waiting for me to die so he can force her hand. She won't have a choice then. I felt a knot tighten in my gut. I'd heard rumors about Victor, how he treated women like property, how he'd ruined folks who crossed him. That's not right," I muttered. Margaret nodded. "Your dad helped me once, years back. Loaned me money for medicine when no one else would. Never asked for it back. You're like him, Ethan. Folks say you're decent. You don't take advantage. I'm not asking for pity or handouts. Not money, not medicine. Just a safe place for her. A roof, work, and a man strong enough to stand up to Victor and say no." I leaned back, staring at the floor. Marriage? I hadn't thought about it in years. My life was the ranch, the solitude. But looking at Margaret, her eyes pleading without begging, I couldn't turn her away. I won't promise marriage, I said slowly. That's not something to force, but she can come here, work on the ranch, help with chores, cooking if she wants. I'll pay her fare, give her a room in the guest house, her own space, her own key. She can leave any time, no strings, and I'll make sure Victor stays away. Margaret's shoulders sagged with relief, tears welling up but not falling. That's more than enough. Thank you, Ethan. God bless you. She left soon after, shuffling back down the dusty path to her truck. I watched her go, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows over the fields. Elena would be coming not out of love or choice, but survival. It wasn't how I'd pictured my life changing, but as I headed back to the barn, I felt the weight of it settle in. For the first time in years, the ranch wouldn't be so empty. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The next morning came early, like it always does on the ranch. I was up before dawn, feeding the cattle and checking the water troughs under a sky still streaked with pink from the sunrise. The air was already warming, the dry heat promising another scorcher by noon. I kept glancing at the dirt road leading up to the house, half expecting Margaret's old truck to pull in, but it didn't show until almost 10. When it did, Elena stepped out from the passenger side, clutching a worn suitcase that looked like it had seen better days. She was 25, with dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing faded jeans and a plain t-shirt that hung loose on her frame. She wasn't flashy, nothing about her screamed for attention, but there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, even if her eyes darted around like she was assessing an escape route. Margaret hugged her tight, whispering something I couldn't hear, then turned to me. "Take care of her, Ethan," she said, her voice cracking just a bit. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all over again. Elena didn't say much as her mom drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind. She just stood there, suitcase in hand, looking at the house like it was a foreign country. "Come on in," I said, leading her inside. The kitchen smelled like coffee and hay from the open windows. I showed her around quick. The main house where I'd stay, the guest room out back in the old bunkhouse that I'd cleaned up the night before. It had its own door, a small bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the fields. "This is yours," I told her. "Keys on the hook. Lock it if you want. You can come and go as you please." She set her bag down carefully, like she was afraid to disturb anything. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. We sat at the table and laid it out plain. "You're not here as a favor," I said. "This is work. Help with chores, cooking if you're up for it, tending the garden, maybe learning to handle the sheep or cutting hay. I'll pay you weekly, fair wage, same as I'd pay anyone. No obligations beyond that. If you want to leave tomorrow, you leave. No hard feelings." Elena nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "And my mom?" "I'll make sure she gets her medicine. Already called the general store this morning. They'll deliver it weekly on my tab." She looked up then, her eyes searching mine for a catch. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." I shrugged, pouring us both some coffee. "Your mom asked, and I've been where you are, alone, backed into a corner. Ranch life's tough, but it's honest. Figured you could use a fair shot." We didn't talk much more that first day. She unpacked quietly while I headed back to the fields, giving her space. By evening, she'd made supper. Simple stew with potatoes and beef from the freezer, better than anything I'd cooked in months. We ate in silence mostly, the crickets chirping outside as the sun dipped low. She cleared the plates without a word, and I thanked her. That was it. No deep conversations, no prying. Just the start of a routine. The days blurred into each other after that. Mornings, I'd be out with the cattle, herding them to fresh pasture under the relentless sun that baked the ground hard as concrete. Elena took to the work like she'd been born to it. She'd start in the kitchen, whipping up eggs and toast, then move to the garden, pulling weeds from the tomato plants or harvesting whatever was ripe. I caught her at the general store once, picking up supplies on her own dime. Flour, spices, things to make the meals less bland. She didn't ask for reimbursement. I slipped it into her first paycheck anyway. One afternoon, about a week in, I showed her how to operate the old tractor for cutting hay. The machine was finicky, coughing dust and rattling, like it might fall apart, but she listened close, her hands steady on the controls. "Like this?" she asked, easing it forward across the field. The sun was high, sweat beading on her forehead, but she didn't complain. I nodded, walking alongside. "You're a natural." She gave a small smile, the first real one I'd seen, but it faded quick. Evenings were quieter. We'd eat, her cooking getting better each time, like the stew turning into full meals with cornbread or fresh salads from the garden. After, she'd wash up while I tallied the day's expenses in my ledger, the numbers always tight but manageable. She kept track too, noting every bale of hay or gallon of feed, her handwriting neat and precise. I appreciated that. No sloppiness, no shortcuts. But we kept our distance. I'd nod goodnight, and she'd head to her room, the door clicking shut behind her. Rumors about Victor Hale started filtering in soon enough. I heard them at the bank when I went to deposit a check. Whispers that he was asking around about Elena, saying she was hiding out on my land. He hadn't shown his face yet, but I felt his shadow. One day, after picking up feed from the silos he owned, the clerk mentioned offhand that Victor had inquired about my accounts. I just nodded and left, but that night I double-checked the gates and made sure the rifle in the shed was loaded. Not that I wanted trouble, but I wouldn't let him near her. As the weeks passed, little things started to shift. One hot day, Elena cut her hand on a barbed wire fence while helping me repair it. Blood welled up quick and she tried to brush it off, but I insisted on bandaging it in the kitchen. "Hold still," I said, cleaning the cut with antiseptic from the first aid kit. Her hand was warm in mine, calloused from work but soft in a way that surprised me. She didn't pull away, just watched me with those careful eyes. "Thanks," she murmured when I was done. That evening, I found a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies and lupines from the edge of the property, left on the porch step near my boots. No note, but I knew it was her. I set them in a jar on the table and neither of us mentioned it. I started noticing how the ranch felt less empty. The house smelled like fresh bread instead of dust. The animals seemed calmer with her around. She had a way with the sheep, talking soft to them while scattering feed. And me? For the first time since Dad died, I didn't dread the quiet nights. But Elena still carried her burdens heavy. I'd catch her staring out the window toward town, her face tight with worry, or hear her pacing in her room late at night. She thought of herself as a burden, I could tell, always apologizing for small things, like using too much soap or eating an extra helping. "You're not," I'd say flatly. "You're earning your keep." One evening, after a long day baling hay under the scorching sun, we sat on the porch with iced tea she'd made. The air was cooling, stars starting to prick the sky. "Why do you live like this?" she asked suddenly. "Alone, I mean. You're kind. You could have a family." I stared at the horizon, the fields golden in the fading light. "Dad died young. Mom left when I was a kid. Ranch is all I know. Never found someone who fit." I paused, glancing at her. "What about you, before all this?" She shrugged, her voice soft. "Mom's been sick forever. Dad ran off years ago. I've just been surviving." We didn't push further, but that conversation lingered, like the first crack in the walls we'd built. Victor's presence loomed, but for now we had this fragile peace. Elena wasn't just working here anymore, she was part of the rhythm. And slowly, without me even realizing, she was pulling me out of my own shadows. Things started to unravel about a month after Elena moved in. The summer heat had settled in like a heavy blanket, the days stretching long and dry, with the sun turning the pastures golden brown. I'd grown used to our rhythm, the quiet mornings where she'd have coffee ready, the afternoons spent side by side in the fields, her learning to drive the baler while I handled the heavier lifting. We didn't talk much about personal things, but there was a comfort in the silence, a shared understanding that neither of us pushed. Victor Hale's name had come up in whispers around town, but he hadn't made a move yet. I figured he was biding his time, watching from afar like the vulture he was. It all came to a head one Saturday at the general store in Harlow. I'd driven in for supplies, fencing wire, feed supplements, and a few groceries. The place was buzzing as usual, folks chatting by the counter about the drought and crop prices. Elena had come with me, something she'd started doing lately to pick up things for the kitchen. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the locals, but I noticed the stares. As we loaded the truck outside, Victor Hale pulled up in his shiny black SUV, the kind that screamed money in a town where most folks drove beat-up pickups. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with a perpetual smirk. dressed in a crisp shirt like he was heading to a board meeting instead of the dusty streets of Montana. He didn't approach us directly at first. Instead, he sauntered into the store, loud enough for everyone to hear. I was tying down the load when I overheard him inside, his voice carrying through the open door. "That Walker's got himself a live-in helper now, huh? Pretty young thing like that must be getting some benefits out of the deal. Women like her, they're just waiting for the right offer." Laughter rippled from a couple of his cronies, but it died quick when folks realized who he meant. Elena froze beside me, her face paling under the sun. I felt a fire ignite in my chest, hotter than the midday heat. I'd never been one for confrontations, kept my head down, focused on the ranch. But this was different. I marched back into the store, the bell jingling harshly behind me. Victor was at the counter paying for a pack of cigarettes, still chuckling. The room went quiet as I stepped up. "She's not a thing to talk about like that," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Elena's no one's property, and you got no right spreading lies." Victor turned slowly, his smirk fading into a cold stare. "Walker," he drawled. "Didn't realize you were the protective type. But let's be real, girl like her, poor as dirt, living under your roof. Folks are gonna wonder what's really going on. Maybe you're the one getting the sweet end of the bargain." The store owner shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, and a few customers murmured. I felt my fists clench, but I kept it together. She's working honest, earning her keep, and if anyone's getting ideas about forcing her hand, they can forget it. She's not for sale. I looked around the room, meeting eyes. None of us are. Victor laughed, but it was forced. He pocketed his change and brushed past me, shoulder-checking me on the way out. "We'll see about that, boy." He climbed into his SUV and sped off, leaving dust in his wake. The store erupted in whispers as soon as he was gone. Some folks nodded at me approvingly, others avoided my gaze. Elena was waiting by the truck, her arms crossed tight. We drove home in silence, the tension thick as the heat. That evening after supper, I found her in the barn sitting on a hay bale with her head in her hands. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the open doors, the air still warm and filled with the scent of dried grass. She was crying quietly, shoulders shaking. I approached slow, not wanting to startle her. "Elena?" She looked up, wiping her eyes quick. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring this on you. He's right. People will talk. I'm just a burden." I knelt down in front of her, the straw crunching under my boots. "No," I said firmly, "you're not. What he said, it's poison. You're here because your mom asked and I agreed. But it's more than that now. You've made this place feel like a home again." She shook her head, tears falling fresh. "You stood up for me. No one's ever done that, not like that." She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched my arm. "Why? I'm nothing. Just a poor girl with no future." "You're everything," I blurted, the words surprising even me. "You've pulled me out of the dark, Elena. After Dad died, I was just existing, working, sleeping, repeating. But with you here, I feel alive, like there's purpose again." She stared at me, her breath catching. I love you, Ethan, but I'm scared. If this becomes something, what if it ruins everything? This is the only safe place I have." I took her hand gently, feeling the calluses that matched my own. "Then we take it slow, no rush. But I'm not letting fear or Victor take this from us." We sat there as the light faded, her head eventually resting on my shoulder. It was the first real touch beyond necessity, and it felt right, like a weight lifting. But the peace didn't last. A few weeks later, Margaret's health took a sharp turn. Elena got the call from the doctor while we were out in the fields. Her mom was fading fast. We rushed to the small clinic in town, the sun beating down mercilessly on the drive. Margaret was in a bed by the window, oxygen mask on, her skin pale and thin. She managed a weak smile when she saw us. "Elena, honey," she rasped, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Ethan." "Thank you." Elena broke down, holding her tight. I stepped back, giving them space, but Margaret motioned me closer. "Take care of her," she whispered. "She's strong. But she needs you." Margaret passed that night, peaceful in her sleep. I handled everything, the arrangements at the wooden church, the simple service with a few townsfolk who remembered her kindness. We buried her in the small cemetery on the hill, under a sky so blue it hurt. Elena clung to me during the graveside prayer, her sobs quiet but deep. Afterward, back at the ranch, she tried to push me away, saying she needed to grieve alone, that she didn't want to drag me down. But I stayed, sitting with her on the porch through the long nights, not saying much, just being there. We didn't cross any lines, no kisses, no promises beyond the day-to-day. We were both too raw, too afraid of shattering what little we had. But in that shared sorrow, we grew closer, the bond forging stronger than before. The ranch felt like ours now, not just mine. And though Victor's threats lingered in the back of my mind, for those moments, we had each other. The weeks after Margaret's funeral blurred into a haze of grief and routine. Elena threw herself into the work harder than ever, as if keeping busy could hold the pain at bay. I'd catch her in quiet moments, staring at the horizon during hay baling or wiping tears while tending the sheep, but she never broke down in front of me again. We grew closer in subtle ways, shared glances over supper, her hand brushing mine when passing tools, nights on the porch where we'd talk about nothing and everything. I didn't push for more. The ranch felt solid with her there, and that was enough for now. Victor Hale had gone quiet after our run-in at the store, but I knew better than to think he'd backed off. Men like him didn't forget slights. It started with a letter from the local bank slipped under the door one morning while I was out checking the cattle. The envelope was crisp, official, with the bank's seal stamped in blue ink. I opened it at the kitchen table, Elena pouring coffee nearby. The words jumped out, "Notice of debt acquisition." My heart sank as I read on. Victor Hale, through his connections at the bank, had bought up every outstanding loan on the ranch. The mortgage Dad had taken out years ago for new equipment. The line of credit I'd used last winter for feed during the drought. The total was staggering, more than I'd ever seen in one place. $85,000, due in full within 60 days or face foreclosure. At the bottom, a handwritten note. "Let's discuss terms. VH." Elena saw my face and set the pot down. "What is it?" I handed her the letter, my hand steady but my mind racing. "He's coming for us, bought the debts. He owns the bank in all but name." She scanned it, her expression hardening. "I'll go. If that's what he wants." "No," I cut her off, sharper than I meant. "We're not playing his game." But that night, after she went to her room, I sat up late with the ledger, crunching numbers under the dim kitchen light. The ranch was breaking even, maybe a little profit on good months, but $85,000. It might as well have been $1 million. I thought about selling off land, but that would gut the place. Dad's legacy reduced to scraps. Sleep didn't come easy. The next day, Victor showed up unannounced, his SUV crunching gravel in the driveway just as we finished lunch. He stepped out looking smug, hat in hand, like he was paying a neighborly visit. Elena tensed beside me on the porch, but I put a hand on her arm. "Stay here." I met him halfway across the yard, the sun glaring off his polished boots. "Walker," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "Heard about the letter. Tough spot." "What do you want, Hale?" I asked, crossing my arms. He chuckled, glancing past me at Elena. "Straight to it, huh? Fine. You know what I want." The girl leaves with me, quiet, no fuss, and I wipe the slate clean. Debt's gone. Ranch stays yours. Hell, I'll even throw in a little extra for improvements. She's got no future here anyway. Poor thing like her. She needs security. I felt my jaw tighten. She's not leaving, and neither am I, and neither am... Victor's smile faded. "Boy, you think you're some hero? This town's mine. One word, and no one buys your hay, your beef, nothing. You'll be bankrupt by fall. Send her my way and it's done." I stepped closer, voice low. "Get off my land." He backed up, but not before spitting on the ground. 60 days, Walker. Tick-tock." His SUV roared off, leaving dust swirling in the heat. Elena was waiting inside, pale but determined. "Ethan, maybe—" "No," I said again. "We're not selling each other to survive. That's not living." She nodded, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Over the next few days, she grew distant, working longer hours, eating less, slipping out early to town without saying why. I figured it was grief or worry about the debt. But one evening while she was in the barn, I found a note in her room. half written, crumpled on the dresser. Ethan, I'm sorry, this is the only way. My blood ran cold. She was planning to go to Victor to sacrifice herself for the ranch. I confronted her that night after supper, the air thick with unspoken tension. You were going to leave, I said, holding up the note. Without telling me. She froze, tears welling. The debt? It's my fault he's doing this. If I go, it's over. You keep the ranch, it's not worth losing everything for me. I pulled her into a hug, the first real one, her body stiff at first, then melting against mine. We're in this together, I whispered. No more hiding, we fight it. But fighting meant facing reality. I went to the bank the next morning, the small brick building on Main Street where everyone knew your business. The manager, an old friend of Dad's named Tom, looked apologetic as he spread out the papers. Victor's got the notes now, Ethan, legal as can be. 60 days. I nodded, throat tight. Any way out? Tom sighed. Pay it off. But that's a lot for anyone here. Word spread fast in Harlow. By afternoon at the general store, folks were whispering. Mrs. Ellis, the widow who ran the counter, patted my hand when I bought nails. Heard about Hale. That man's poison. Your dad would have stood tall. You do the same. That evening, a knock came at the door. It was old Mr. Jenkins, the one I'd helped last winter, with an envelope of cash, $500, all he could spare. For the ranch, he said gruffly. Can't let Hale win. It snowballed from there. The next day, families I'd helped over the years started showing up. The Ramirez clan, who I'd given free hay during their bad season, brought $1,200 from selling a calf early. The church held a quiet collection after Sunday service, the wooden pews filled with nods and murmurs of support. Even kids pitched in. Little Tommy from down the road emptied his piggy bank, $37 in coins, saying, For Miss Elena, she's nice. But we were still short, $20,000 away with weeks ticking down. Elena and I worked harder, selling off what we could, extra equipment, a few sheep, but it wasn't enough. Victor sent another letter gloating, Time's running out. Offer stands. The turning point came one rainy afternoon, the first break in the summer drought. A truck pulled up, and out stepped Mr. Harlan, a grizzled farmer who'd been friends with my mom before she left town years ago. He was in his 70s, walking slow with a cane, but his eyes were sharp. Ethan, he said, handing me a thick envelope. Your mom helped me once, back when my barn burned. Gave me seed money to rebuild. Never forgot. Sold a parcel of my land last week. Here's the proceeds. Exactly what you need. I stared at the check inside. $20,000. I can't. You can, he interrupted. Pay it forward someday. With that, we had it all. I marched to the bank the next day, the full amount in cashier's checks, the lobby quiet as I laid them on Tom's desk. Victor was there, waiting in his office like he'd expected a surrender. His face twisted when Tom confirmed the payment. How? He demanded. Folks in this town, I said, standing tall. They remember kindness, not threats. Word exploded. By evening, the general store was abuzz. Victor's schemes laid bare, his reputation crumbling. Suppliers cut ties, farmers boycotted his silos, and the bank board started whispering about investigations. He packed up quietly a week later, selling off assets and leaving Harlow for good, his empire in tatters. As the dust settled, Elena and I sat on the porch, the ranch secure under a starlit sky. The community had saved us, but more than that, we'd saved each other. The weight lifted, and for the first time, the future felt possible. After Victor left town, a quiet settled over the ranch like the calm after a storm. The summer heat began to ease, the days shortening as August gave way to September, the fields turning from gold to amber under the still bright sun. Elena and I moved through the routines with a new lightness, baling the last of the hay, tending the animals, sharing meals that felt less like obligations and more like home. The debt was gone, paid off by the hands of folks who'd become more than neighbors. They were family now, in a way. Calls came in daily, offers to help with fencing, invitations to church suppers at the wooden chapel on the hill. Harlow had shown its true colors, and Victor's defeat had knit us all closer. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, I found Elena in the garden, kneeling among the late tomatoes, her hands dirty from the soil. She looked up as I approached, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm, a small smile playing on her lips. It was moments like these that hit me hardest. The way she'd transformed from the guarded woman who'd arrived with nothing but a suitcase to someone who laughed freely, who hummed old folk songs while cooking. I knelt beside her, pulling a weed absent-mindedly. "Elena," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We've been through hell. Your mom, Victor, the ranch. But we're still here. Together." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "We are." I reached into my pocket, pulling out the simple gold band I'd picked up in town the week before. Not flashy, just a plain ring that had belonged to my grandmother, polished up at the general store. "I don't want this because of duty or to prove something to the town. I want it because I love you, because you've made me whole again. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them, taking the ring with trembling fingers. "Yes, Ethan, yes." We didn't rush the wedding. No big announcements or fancy plans. A few weeks later, on a crisp Saturday morning, we gathered at the old wooden church in Harlow, the one with the steeple that creaked in the wind and pews worn smooth from generations of prayers. The pastor, an elderly man who'd known my dad, agreed to keep it simple. Word had spread quietly, and by the time we arrived, the chapel was packed. Not with strangers, but with the faces who'd stood by us. Mr. Jenkins with his weathered hat, the Ramirez family in their Sunday best, Mrs. Ellis from the store carrying a basket of fresh pies. Even Mr. Harlan showed, leaning on his cane, a proud grin on his face. Elena wore a white dress she'd altered herself from one found at a thrift shop in the next town over. Simple lace, flowing just right in the breeze. I stood at the altar in my best shirt and jeans, heart pounding as she walked down the aisle alone, the sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colors on the floor. We exchanged vows under that roof, promising to protect, to cherish, to face whatever came next. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. When I slipped the ring on her finger, the congregation clapped, a warm murmur filling the air. The reception was back at the ranch, under the big oak tree in the yard. Tables groaned with food folks had brought: roast beef, salads, cakes baked fresh. Laughter echoed as kids chased each other through the grass, and someone strummed a guitar by the fire pit as the sun set. Elena and I danced slow under the string lights we'd hung, her head on my shoulder. "This is real," she whispered. "We made it." In the months that followed, the ranch thrived in ways I hadn't imagined. With the debt cleared, I invested in better irrigation, turning parched fields into green pastures. Elena took charge of the garden, expanding it to include herbs and vegetables we sold at the market, her stall bustling now that Victor's shadow was gone. Folks came not just to buy, but to chat, to share stories. The community that had saved us became our network. Trades for tools, shared labor during calving season. We weren't rich, but we were secure, the barn full and the animals healthy. Then, one winter morning after the first snow dusted the ground, Elena woke me with a soft shake. "Ethan," she said, her eyes wide. "I'm pregnant." Joy hit me like a wave. We held each other as the news sank in, laughing through tears in the quiet of our room. The pregnancy was smooth, Elena glowing as her belly grew, the town rallying with hand-me-downs and advice. She craved fresh milk from our cows, and I'd bring it straight from the barn each morning. We painted the spare room in soft blues, turning it into a nursery with a crib I'd built myself from ranch wood. The baby came on a stormy spring night, the rain pounding the roof as we rushed to the clinic in town. After hours of labor, our daughter arrived, tiny with Elena's dark hair and my stubborn chin. We named her Rose Margaret Walker, after Elena's mom and mine, a way to honor the women who'd shaped us, who'd fought through their own hardships. Holding her that first time, her little hand gripping my finger, I felt a completeness I'd never known. Elena smiled from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "She's perfect," she whispered. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Mornings with Rose's cries pulling us from sleep, Elena nursing her by the window as the sun rose over the fields. I'd work the ranch with one eye on the house, coming in for lunch to hold my daughter, her gurgles filling the once silent rooms. Evenings, we'd sit as a family, Elena reading stories from old books, me rocking Rose to sleep while the fire crackled. The ranch wasn't just land anymore. It was home, alive with laughter and love. Looking back as I watch Elena and Rose in the garden now, the summer sun warm on their faces, I realize how far we've come. Two people pushed to the edge, her by poverty and loss, me by isolation, now building something unbreakable. The town stood with us, proving kindness outlasts greed. Victor's gone, but the lessons remain. Dignity can't be bought, love grows from protection and choice, and family is in blood. It's the ones you hold onto through the storms. Rose toddles toward me, her tiny hands outstretched, and I scoop her up, Elena joining us with a kiss. The house lights flicker on as dusk falls, warm against the cooling air. We've got a future now, bright in ours, and that's everything.